Hello, thank you for watching this In Conversation. And I'm pleased to be joined by Alan Gavaghan, the chairman of the Farnham Society. So, Alan, good morning. It is morning when we're doing this. Thank
Morning,
you.
Richard. Good
Thank
morning.
you for your time. And it's a great opportunity, I think, just to reflect on the Farnham Society, its purpose, its history, because you've been so instrumental over recent years as chairman of the society. And I thought it would be interesting for all members to get your reflections. And perhaps we'll start, because I was looking at some of the history, and it's a list of names of people who have been chairman that are very notable in terms of personalities in Farnham, and started, of course, by Borelli and Faulkner. So, what do you see as the role of the Farnham Society and its position in Farnham?
Well, it's worth, I think, reflecting on why I came to Farnham and why I suspect many other people wanted to come and live in Farnham. It has a great drawing power, I think, both for visitors and for people who wish to live in the area. And when you analyse what is it, it's the sheer character of the town, which draws you towards architecture, of course, the buildings, the conservation areas, and it gives it that sort of pulling power for people to come and enjoy living in the area. And I think the prime objective of the society is really to preserve that, not to allow the town not to alter, but the core elements, I think, need to be preserved to keep people interested and fascinated by Farnham, as I think most people are.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that you position it in terms of the environment and the ambience, the conservation areas of Farnham, that it was started by two notable people that had an influence on Farnham. Borelli and Faulkner. We see their footprint, don't we, in defining that market town, everywhere. Whilst that's a great advantage, is it also a barrier? Is there this sense that the Farnham Society just wants to keep things as it is? But you mentioned the fact that that's perhaps not the idea. How do you develop, and grow a town based on its history, like you've described?
Well, I've often thought that Borelli and Faulkner are a couple of rogues in many ways. They work together so cleverly. I mean, Faulkner with his architectural ideas and his determination to preserve bits of buildings from one part and putting it elsewhere. And then you had, of course, Borelli as a businessman in the centre of the town and a local councillor. And somehow between them, they managed to produce what we see now as much of Farnham. Nowadays, with transparency being what it is, they would find it very difficult to do what they did. But to preserve Farnham is not a question of putting it in aspic. It's to maintain those qualities, as I mentioned before, which attract people to come here in the first time, and then become so interested in it, might even want to live here. So it's preserving what's right for the future as well as the present. That's, as I see, the principles of why the Farnham Society exists and has flourished over the years.
Because it's one of the largest civic and amenity societies, isn't it? I'm not sure everybody knows that, but it's got quite a strength in terms of the size of its membership.
Yes.
I don't know whether you can hear my dog. I think he's joining in, but anyway, he'll quieten down. So the size of the Farnham Society, and therefore that makes a difference to its potential influence?
Yes, it does. I mean, we are a non-political organisation, but inevitably when you're dealing with planning matters, which impact on the whole of the community, you get drawn into very often what appear to be political conflicts. It's not a conflict from our point of view in political terms, but it's important that we have influence behind us, and that influence is membership. And we have about 650 members. I remember when I took over as chairman some years ago, the membership base seemed to be higher, but there was some lack of coordination between the treasurer's records and the membership records. And we spent some time unraveling those, and we suddenly found we had about 100 people who had either been dead or weren't paying or only paying half the subscription. or had lost interest. So we appear to go backwards for a time. But since then, we've grown the membership. I've always had in mind 1,000 members as an objective.
Yeah.
Because as you hinted, I mean, the more members we have, the greater influence we have in political and official circles.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk now, having got that sort of background of history about your time. You say you've been involved a long time. When did your involvement start?
Well, it all started, I suppose, with a phone call from a friend and saying, would you be interested in becoming chairman of the Farnham Society, which took me by surprise because I'd always thought the great and the good only were endowed with the privilege of being chairman of the Farnham Society. So I thought it was a joke initially, but I quickly realized it wasn't. And that was back in 2010, I think.
Wow.
And I was reflecting the other day on that first annual general meeting, and the subjects which were discussed are not dissimilar. Many are very similar to what we're talking about now. I remember one was air quality, which is a surprise, and perhaps I can talk about that later because I see that as a highlight and success that we became involved in. The other one, and a comment from the floor, which was a question, was they're stuffing it down our throat, was the East Street development. Now we're talking 2010. And 3 decades later, we're still talking about East Street or Brightwells Yard.
Yeah.
Heritage Open Day was mentioned. Again, perhaps I can talk about that later. But there's so many things which were talked about then are still being talked about now. So there's a prevalence of problems, I think, which filter through over the years. And all those years we've been nibbling away at them, I think, hitting some success. Even where we haven't been successful, at least we've laid down markers as to what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. And I think that's where we have to stand up and put up with some of the aggression that we've had in the past when extreme opinions have conflicted.
Yeah. I mean, that's a difficult balance to get when you get that sort of input. So let's talk about some of those challenges. You mentioned East Street. It's very prevalent in terms of Farnham now. So take me back to the original discussions about Brightwells. I say that because people still don't quite understand that there was resistance to the Brightwells development. When you see people now saying, how on earth, and I know there are a variety of opinions, but I'm focusing on this one, how on earth was this development allowed to take place? And I know the Farnham Society was very much involved in that, and so were you.
Yes, I came in after it had actually really started getting into its stride, as it were. But I think what really triggered all this was that this was put out to tender. The public were asked to vote on which of the tenders they felt was right for Farnham. And they selected in sequence a number of choices. And the one that the council chose was the third public choice, way down the list.
When you say the council, which council are you referring to?
We're talking about Waverley, basically, and obviously backed by Surrey.
The borough council, that
yes.
tier of council government. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. It was obviously the politicians at that time who were dealing with this. And they chose this, and at the time it was chosen because they made the mistake, first of all, of going into partnership with a developer, which is not unknown, but it is exceptional. Because to enter into partnership, it means you have a common aim. And if you're the planning authority and you're linked with a commercial organisation whose one aim is to build profitably for their shareholders, there must be conflict along the way, you would have thought. But nevertheless, they went into partnership. And from then on, the most strange things happened, which inflamed the views of the public. For instance, when all property prices were increasing and land prices were increasing, strangely in Farnham, they dropped. And they were sold at very low rates to the developer. That seemed strange. But then the planning regulations appear to be bent in favour of the contractor. There were non-material amendments, as they call them, going through, which usually are just minor things like changing the shape of a door. But these were major changes which were being pushed through without any sanction or consideration whatsoever. You had the basic agreement between the developer being changed without any reference, being just pushed through, or politically pushed through, because it became very much a political thing. And then the public suddenly found the bowling green had gone. Now, up to now, most people were thinking East Street was East Street because it was called the East Street development. It wasn't East Street at all. It was behind East Street. It was the bowling green which went. It was the tennis courts which went. It was a Gostry Day Centre which went to facilitate, ironically, Marks and Spencer's coming in. So the day centre went and was pushed out to the Memorial Hall. And the ratepayers have ended up paying for the alterations and extensions to the Memorial Hall, which should have gone to the developer. So all these things were boiling up and people were getting very distressed by it. And it ended up with a 4-day public meeting where the challenge was issued because there was suspicion that there was no finance backing this project. And the suspicion grew because all our advisors, both financial and architectural, were saying, don't worry, it'll never happen because nobody's foolish enough to back this financially. And, we believed that and it was right. But, of course, we hadn't allowed for the fact that at the public meeting, when the Waverley representatives said that they had excellent blue chip, I remember being used, blue chip backers queuing up. We're waiting to select the best interest rate. The inspector then said, well, can you tell me who this investor is that you're really considering? They said, oh, no, can't do that. Commercial interest intervenes. But he insisted. So eventually he said, come back tomorrow and you can give me the information and I will not disclose it publicly. And next day he came back, letter was passed the inspector. He said, okay, that's fine. I can't disclose it. And then, strange enough, 3 weeks later, the offer was withdrawn. So there was still no finance backing this. And at this stage, our then politicians went to Surrey County Council, to the opposite numbers in the political field, and hey presto, Surrey, who were closing down all sorts of social things, found 30 to 50 million to provide the finance. So this really engendered final rage in the mind of the public. And the only option was to go for a judicial review.
Oh, yeah.
And,
so we're talking about what year here? Are we back in 2010 to 12 or?
No, it's a bit, about 16, was it? I can't remember. 8.
Oh, okay, a little bit further on, yeah.
But it was at the point, I think, where public patience had just run out. And very bravely, 5 individuals offered to become, to press the claim in the High Courts. They were very brave to do this because at the time there's no financial backing and they exposed themselves to very considerable sums of money. And this it was led by 2 councillors, Andy MacLeod, who is still a councillor, and John Williamson, who has now gone away, and Celia Sanders, who unfortunately died recently, and her husband, Richard.
So here we are going up to the High Court for a judicial review.
Yeah. And the 5 claimants representing Farnham very bravely offered themselves to do this without financial backing. So it was felt generally in the arena of the public arena that we should try, the public should try, to raise funds to support them. So a public appeal was launched. We gave support to this, and money started to come in. In fact, one particular donor provided £50,000, and to this day, that donor remains anonymous, although still around and active. And we then found that no one wished to act as bankers and be financial controllers. So we offered ourselves to do that, which was quite a big thing to do with our limited resources because there were small amounts being paid as well as obviously significant amounts. So we acted as bankers for that. And we went for the review was undertaken initially by a judge to decide whether there was grounds to go ahead. And he said it was arguable, but he was concerned about the legal status of the 5 claimants. Now, we were under the impression that we were okay because in Winchester there was a Silver Hills development where a councillor had initiated a similar action and won, and that development was stopped. So we felt reasonably comfortable.
Because there was that precedent of something similar.
Yes, yeah, very similar, almost identical, in fact, with one unfortunate difference, which we discovered later. It went to judicial review, and the judge ruled that there was no legal interest vested in the claimants on the basis that they had no financial involvement directly. It boiled down to you had to be a developer to press as a claimant to overturn the development proposed in Farnham. And as it happened, the councillor in Winchester was a developer. Right. So it's on that small turning point that our effort collapsed. We believed if it had gone to a full-blown court hearing, some of the things which I've outlined would have been forced to be exposed, and that the procedure had not been followed properly by Waverley Council.
So if I can sort of so we have here a development that was I'm going to use the word a shocking surprise to many. It wasn't the choice of the development of the public consultation. It was actually the third choice. But there was a movement to try and prevent that particular development, in which the Farnham Society became involved, both in supporting the raising of funds and acting as banker for those funds. I mean, this is quite a movement against that development, but it wasn't successful. I mean, in a sense, I think outlining that story is important, because there have been comments that says, well, why hasn't the Farnham Society done this? Or why hasn't the Farnham Society done that? The fact is that back in that time, the Farnham Society was very central to trying to get a different development. Where does the story end?
Well, it has ended, really, in one sense. I mean, it's there. I mean, it's going up. It's still not open. I mean, here we are, 3 decades into this. I might add that similar developments elsewhere take 3 to 4 years. Here we are, still struggling to, I think the last date I heard was July this year that it should be completed. Well, we shall see. It is there. It's silly to ignore the fact that it's there. And the Farnham Society would like to see it succeed. It's going to be extremely difficult. We have put in our ideas, both on the types of people or how the retail side could be developed and used. We have put forward ideas how the access to it could be improved. We're pushing and have been pushing hard for some time how to improve the possibility of turning this into a financial success. It's an uphill fight, and the existing politicians are undoubtedly struggling, but they have a difficult problem to resolve.
I mean, it is worth noting, I suppose, that the political side of this, and being apolitical, whether it's right or wrong, but the people that were involved in actually pushing hard and making that development happen, of course, are nowhere still involved in the majority of the case. It's an interesting thought, that, isn't it? As to the way, big decisions can be made, and the accountability for that disappears in the sense of the people involved.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it laid down a marker that politicians should listen more closely to what the public are saying. I think it has made a number sit back and think, we really do have to be careful in the future and start listening, particularly when it's such a powerful response. It wasn't just a few extremists. This was right across the community. The sort of support we got financially, which I mentioned, gives you some indication of how powerful it was, but it was ignored. in fact, there was an arrogance about it. It was, you're almost told, well, go away, you're just being a nuisance. And some of the abuse that was dished out, old geriatrics, non-elected, meeting in private, all this stuff. I even had people in the street coming up to it, and most saying, great, keep it going. But you have one or two coming up, quite abusive. In fact, nobody likes to be unpopular, but there are times when you need to be. And one of the things that cheered me is a silly thing, really, in one sense. I've never been terribly interested in poetry. But in the midst of all this abuse, somebody put through my letterbox with just a little note saying, don't worry, this might cheer you up. I'll read this. It may not be of great relevance, but it's a poet called Charles Mackay. Well, we had a donation from Beryl Mackay after she died. I don't know if they're related, but anyway, this came through the letterbox without any prompting from me. It says, you have no enemies, you say. Alas, my friend, the post is poor. He who has mingled in the fray of duty that the brave endure must have made foes. If you have none, small is the work that you have done. You've hit no traitor on the hip. You've dashed no cup from perjured lip. You've never turned the wrong to right. You've been a coward in the fight. And that cheered me up enormously at the time.
Well, look, I mean, we don't normally go into that sort of level of detail in these conversations, but it's important because it's such a dominant feature of the Farnham Society, sort of the view it's taken, the way it's pursued its purpose, and of course of your period as chair. And actually the way you describe it, it clearly it's had a big influence on you in terms of as you reflect back, and that's perfectly understandable. You're right, I think, in trying to balancing out a bit, in the sense that, okay, we lick our wounds, we can reflect on a historic sense of how the fight was fought and wasn't successful, but it's there. And actually, doesn't this go to the heart of what the Farnham Society should be in balance, which is, it's there, how do we now contribute to making it a success? And I know the conversations that we've had in the Farnham Society have been very much along those lines. But the society is still involved, isn't it? In terms of some detail, it's still a dominant matter, within Farnham. So it's not yet been delivered.
No, I see it rather like Dunkirk, a real retreat, but in fact made a great victory in the history of this country. And I still see it as a victory because it has laid down a line. You go beyond that line as a reaction.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Dunkirk, yes, a great defeat that we claim as a wonderful victory. Let's move on a little bit, but I don't want to move from that theme, in the sense that, what else do you reflect on? I mean, successes, because, let's call that the Dunkirk. We can describe it as a defeat, or we can describe it as a great recovery victory. What else crosses your mind about, as you reflect back over what you said, 2010, 13 years?
Yeah. I think a number, of course, but one that just jumped to mind was air quality.
Yeah.
In 2011, it was Roger Steele, who was on the committee at the time, had, I think his family were in the medical world, and they drew his attention to the deaths and the dangers of air quality. And we started making inquiries into this, which was eventually taken over by John Slater, who has a scientific background, and he was then joined by Catherine Powell, who is a scientist, an environmental scientist, so she understands the language. But what we immediately found was that the readings which were coming from the sensors, which were distributed around Farnham and in the centre of Farnham, were producing some strange readings. They didn't seem to make a great deal of sense. And Waverley were refusing to issue the actual figures from 2015, 2016. And we maintained pressure to get those figures. And by about 2019, so it took 7 or 8 years to get to this point, they were beginning to cooperate very extensively. At our suggestion, they moved sensors to more specific areas. They put in proper sensors, which is not just the nitrogen dioxide, which is a problem, which it is, but it's the participant matters, which are more dangerous, which are in the atmosphere. And they were now being measured. And it's now on stream. You can actually read the figures. The public can read the figures on stream. So those figures are now up to date. It transpired that there was something strange going on Waverley, which resulted in somebody having to resign or leave. We never really got quite to the bottom of it, but nevertheless, Waverley cooperated very, very well from 2019 onwards, and we now have all those statistics available. In fact, things have improved a bit in the centre of Farnham, mainly perhaps because of COVID, but even after COVID, with a reduction in traffic, it's still better than it was. But the main danger area is Station Hill. It's been worsened by the more regular closing of the barriers there.
Yeah, the train service has been increased, yeah.
Yeah, and the consequence is, of course, fumes are growing there, so it's still quite bad there. But it's still below the danger levels. So things have improved. So I think we can say, well, we got onto that pretty quickly. And although it's nothing to do with buildings, it's certainly to do with the welfare of people living in Farnham.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to make, that it isn't just about the built environment. It's about the way we live in the built environment, and air quality, I know, is a concern for people. And maybe on a wider basis, the membership wouldn't recognise that the Farnham Society was involved in something like that.
No. Well, that happens in many areas. They're probably not quite, like, they know we're involved in planning matters, but I don't think they quite appreciate how deeply we're involved. Going back again to that first AGM, I recall it was reported that there were 400 planning applications that year. We're now talking of thousands, In fact, there's so many, we've had to say, well, we can't look at everybody and everything. We will concentrate on the conservation areas, and we will concentrate on major developments or a development which affects other people outside that immediate area. And that is what we're doing. And we've also had, I think, some recent successes which demonstrate, I think, that the efforts we put into this do bear fruit. The most recent one is, I think, at Bewley Homes. They were talking about 140 houses in Lower Webburn Lane.
Yeah.
Went to 3 appeals, all of which we contested. And I'm pleased to say that the inspector, the third appeal, the inspector ruled in favour of us for a change. When I say us, I mean the public. So that's not going ahead. And there's another one at Badshot Lee. There's 131 houses there. That also has now been turned down by the inspector. So we're making grounds. And the reason the inspector ruled on this to our favour was because the local plan and the neighbourhood plan had put these outside development areas. Now, those plans didn't happen by accident. We were involved in all of them, in grinding out the wording, grinding out knocking on doors with leaflets and getting people to vote to support these plans. And by that, we've stopped these developments and others. There's other big ones pending, and Waverley Lane is a big one along there, which we're waiting for a result on that. So we're fighting all the time in the background. It's either trying to get legislation altered, it's local plans being altered, and that isn't in the public domain. Why should they be interested in that? But it is important.
And what that involves is getting people involved. Now, I want to come to that in a minute, but I want to soften the conversation to say there are other things that I think are emblematic of what the Farnham Society does. I'm thinking of the Heritage Open Days, which is a great it's a great event. It's a great success. I mean, you must look at those and get some satisfaction from the way in which that's developed.
Well, enormously. Again, looking back, it used to be arranged. First of all, this is a national project, but it is left totally to local people to organise. And some towns do it well, some don't do it well. We are in the top level of this. It's first class. But back when I first became involved, I found that there was one person who was running this. I mean, when I say running it, they did everything virtually, and they called on a few people, and it was a nightmare.
Mm.
And then a committee was formed, and Sue Farrow heads this up, and we gave quite a lot of support for obvious reasons to this, and a committee was developed where individual duties were passed to individual members, and they got on with it. And nowadays, you're looking at hundreds, if not thousands, of people being attracted into Farnham for free entertainment, free everything. There's no cost, there's no charge to anybody. It draws in many, many people into the centre of Farnham to see some of the hidden gems of Farnham, which are not normally open and available to the public. It's a great success and great credit to that committee.
Yeah, it certainly is. And it does open up, I wonder what that building's like. And, it's a great opportunity, isn't it? Yeah. I mentioned people because what you paint is a picture of endeavour, if I can put it like that. And this is a group of volunteers, coming together to try and make a difference. And you've articulated with some passion, Alan, I might say, and good for you, what that involves. And it involves, a dogged, a professional. We're not just saying NIMBY here. We're talking about why there could be a better solution. So that involves people. People in volunteer organisations now is a problem. Is that something that affects the Farnham Society?
Oh yes, of course. I mean, we are blessed with an executive committee where each member takes on very wide-ranging responsibilities, and I've never had a complaint. I've never had a failure, frankly, from any member of the committee. They get on with it. They're highly professional. They know what they're doing, and you get no complaint other than the fact, God, I wish we had some more support. And I know the feeling, because you're trying to keep a committee together, which is a chairman's responsibility, to keep the enthusiasm going, to get the commitment going all the time. And that's not difficult with the committee we have, but we just need more.
Yeah.
We need more at the executive level, because we've got some great ideas and great projects. We can't do them because we haven't got the manpower or the womanpower to get on and do it. So, yeah, we need more. We need them at the executive committee level. We need it at the HODS level. We need it at the planning level. I mean, the planning side, run by Yvonne Hess, she does an incredible job. And I just get very... It's not frustration, actually, because I do understand nowadays people have very heavy commitments, particularly younger people, where they're maintaining their jobs, they're working unearthly hours and can never get away with it with emails and electronic links and all the rest of it. So I can understand it. But if they were to sit back and think for a moment, their biggest asset is their home. Houses need to be looked after from the point of view of planning. I mean, you can get all sorts of threats coming at you if you're not aware of it. So for £12 a year, or whatever it is, I think it's about £12 a year, and you get a monthly update on everything that's going on of interest in the area on the planning side. It's worth becoming a member, even if you don't do anything, because I suspect once you become a member and begin to understand what's going on, you will get drawn in, and even an hour a month will be of value. So,
do you think? I mean, it isn't just the Farnham Society that has a problem with this. How do we get the current working generation involved? Seems a challenge that all organisations have had or are having, which could be an existential threat, if I can use that long word, in the sense that in the end, if people, they want what the purpose of the Farnham Society is to happen and be active, but getting people to help drive it is a problem. There's a gap there, isn't there? We've got any ideas what we might do, or shall we just leave it sitting there with an appeal that says anybody watching this that fancies getting involved, there is an open invitation? That's the way that I'm feeling about that sort of conversation.
It is very, very difficult. I mean, we have tried the approach of parent teachers associations, to build links with schools and thereby getting involved with a younger generation of parents. Because I think we were told some time ago that 40% of the population are involved with children. In other words, you've got children going to schools. Well, that is an obvious link. But again, we're back to, do we have sufficient support and time availability of individuals to project this avenue as a potential source of new membership? We've thought about commercial membership. The right commercial organisations who support our objectives might be worth approaching, but we haven't really got round to that either yet. So there are a number of ideas, but we are really hamstrung by a lack of time and ability to focus on these things properly. But at the moment, it's word of mouth, it seems, that people who join find that it's of interest and that we're doing a useful job. They tell their friends and they join.
Yeah. Well, that can be a powerful thing. So can a message like this. So it sits there as an objective. The Farnham Society is not going away. It needs to expand both in its membership, which you've referred to, the objective of it'd be nice to have 1,000 members, but equally we need to find the way of getting people more involved at, you call it the executive level, in a way that is their time used well and is a commitment that they could make. And I guess our invitation is, please, respond. We've got plenty of opportunity for people to be involved. Well, look, let's look back a little and say, and I might answer this question for you, but I was going to say, what's your biggest disappointment? Well, I guess you've explained one of those, but what is your biggest disappointment, really?
Well, it is East Street, Brightwells Yard. That still rankles me. I can't ignore that. I mean, it really sort of dominated my life for so many years.
Yeah.
But no, I am generally optimistic. I think with the right backing, it could, over a number of years, I suspect, come back into profitability and make some sort of return to the ratepayer and taxpayer. So, otherwise, I find it difficult to find something which is even approaching that sort of level of depression. I would like to see us have more recognition statutorily on planning matters, that we should be consulted. I mean, some organisations are consulted in law on major planning matters. And I would like to see us as a reputable, large organisation being taken into the fold, as it were, to be consulted on major matters. At the moment, when we submit, and we do submit some very detailed submissions, we're treated as Joe round the corner who's upset because of the bus stop outside his house. We don't seem to get any further consideration than that. And yet in that detail will be things like where the bus stop should be, where the buses are coming from, how long they should stop for, and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's just treated as Fred round the corner.
Okay, I'll take that as the area of disappointment. So you can see what I'm going to ask you next. When you look back, well, what are the brighter spots? What are the successes?
Well, I think it's, I hope, a success around the corner, and that is the Farnham Infrastructure Programme. And in 2018 at our AGM, we had Jeremy Hunt, who launched what has become the Farnham Infrastructure Programme. And that came out of meetings which he chaired, which I was a member of those committees, as were prominent local architects and other representatives. And from that, it was felt that it should be a public launch. And Jeremy chose the Farnham Society, after a little pressure, to be the base upon which he would launch this idea, which happened in 2018. Since then, it's been slow, which is understandable because it's quite a big deal. A lot of money has been spent on consultation, something over £2 million now. And hopefully we are getting to the point where some announcement will be made actually what has happened. So far, all that's happened is we've got slightly wider pavements and a lot of flowers and narrow roads. What worries me is that some of our recommendations, we still don't know whether they've been accepted. And in very simple terms, my personal belief, first of all, is all this talk about making the borough just totally pedestrianised will never work. It just splits Farnham totally, north, south, west, east. We're a medieval town geared for driving sheep. We have A-class roads coming through. We have no parallel roads to release the pressure, so we're stuck with it. So it seemed a practical solution to say, well, what we've got at the moment with the one-way system is okay, but it could be improved. And in simple terms, what we're saying is a right-hand turn out of Castle Street, which will stop people who want to go west having to go all the way around the circulatory system. And equally at the wagon yard car park at the bottom of Downing Street, you should be able to access that car park straight into Longbridge. You don't have to go all the way around the rotary system to go south. And East Street, back to East Street again, that part of East Street, that could be made, well, rather the Woolmead be made one way, the Woolmead Road. If you made the Woolmead Road two-way, sorry, I'm getting it wrong. If you made it two-way, you could make East Street, that part of East Street, single lane and pedestrianised almost totally, other than emergency vehicles and taxis and that sort of thing, buses. That could be done. We've proposed that. That doesn't seem to be readily accepted, but we think that is the only way you're going to get even partial privatisation towards the centre of Farnham. The other option, which again I think is getting thumbs down, is a relief road from the top of Castle Hill down to the Upper Hart car park, even further on to link to West Street. If you did that, you could then pretty well totally pedestrianise the bottom end of Castle Street. But again, money is intervening, it seems. And what I don't understand is, in the course of all this, planning permission was given for a development of flats right in the way of this parallel road being suggested coming down from Castle Street. So that is voiced immediately as another reason why it's so expensive to do it. Well, why did they allow it in the first place? So you get these frustrations. If I look to the future, I can't really see anything dramatically happening other than high quality changes on the pavements and the materials being used in what's proposed in the centre of Farnham. I mean, it's an absolute disgrace to walk along the borough and look at the so-called pavement, just blobs of tarmac. Some squares, some triangles, some strips, add one bit on top of the other, until you come to something which is private responsibility, like the entrance to the Bush Hotel. Suddenly, it's there. It's, as the conservation area says, it's got to be done. Why is Surrey not doing it? It imposes it on the public. It doesn't do it itself. And it's a disgrace.
A disgrace, a word on which we may finish, Alan. And that will take us a potential future success. But again, it's a scale of project. I hope what we've done in this conversation is a couple of things, is demonstrate the activity of the Farnham Society on particularly the large projects and changes, but equally some small things. It's not just about stopping things, it's about how is it appropriately delivered and moving forward. That's that side of it. The other side of it is to recognise 13 years as chair of the Farnham Society and the burden that you've carried, Alan. But what's come across this morning is that energy and that enthusiasm of what's required to actually step up to the mark on this. And I think Farnham should be very grateful for the active role that you've played and your role as chairman. And I think it's an opportunity to say thank you for that, and particularly with the energy and interest that you've displayed. I know there's always two views, but somebody has to take a view and pursue that course. You've demonstrated that you're one of those people this morning. So thank you for that. And I'm going to end by saying, of course, you're not disappearing. You are staying actively involved. And that success that you've ended on well, you'll be around to see exactly whether you can tick that box. Alan,
Okay.
thanks for your time this morning.
Been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you for this conversation.
Okay. Thanks.